Guia de estilo e instruções para síntese de fala. Início das instruções. Você é um narrador, palestrante, com voz potente, forte e autoritária. O tom deve ser firme e inabalável. Contexto de continuidade. A frase anterior era: Items began to read differently in that moment. Você está no meio de uma frase ou pensamento. Mantenha o ritmo e a força vocal sem quebrar a conexão. Haja como se estivesse transmitindo uma verdade fundamental. Fim das instruções. O pink dress was not just a memory of a simpler afternoon. It was proof that I had spent on myself once, and the fact it still hung untouched seemed suddenly like an accusation. I walked to the kitchen, poured a cup of tea, and counted the pennies of my patience the way an accountant counts loose change. The first week after that call felt like unpeeling layers. I would open the checkbook and fingers would find the entries with a heat in them, as if the ink had been pressed into my skin. There were transfers, automatic every month, that I had set up in kindness, months when I had spat at my pride and sent money so there would be no argument about the lights. Each transaction was a story, an overdue repair, a car payment, a hospital copay. I could recite them in my sleep. The reckoning I had not planned for was the realization that knowing all those numbers did not mean I was safe from being shut out. At the bank, the manager remembered me by my purse, the same worn bag I had had since my late husband died, and by my voice, which she said over and over sounded like a familiar chime. Mrs. Hartwell, she said, using my maiden name the way people sharpened an address they respected. The bank's little private room had a plant in the corner and a framed print of a bridge. I told Mrs. Ramirez the story, the call, the words that were not a date, the way Lena had spoken as if a decision had already been made. She listened with the patient, procedural attention of someone who dealt in small crises for a living. We can put a hold on any unusual transfers, she offered. Her language was careful and technical, and I hung on to it like a rope. We need identification, signatures, maybe we should review all accounts in person. That last part sounded reasonable. It sounded like defense. It also admitted there was threat enough to merit action, and that was the unsettling part. The recognition that my own habit of giving had left me without obvious boundaries. I took the first real, deliberate step that week. I went to the branch and sat across from the teller and insisted on canceling 2 automatic transfers that were scheduled for the next day. The transfers themselves were modest, $450 and $300, but their pathways mattered more than their sums. As Mrs. Ramirez tapped at the computer with a careful rhythm, I watched the cursor blink and thought of all the nights I had stayed up balancing the checkbook, of the way my hands would hesitate over a deposit slip because I wanted to be prudent. My hands trembled only once, and I discovered 2 things. My hands could still tremble and still be useful, and trembling did not surrender. At home that evening, there was a letter on my doormat, heavy with the kind of official language I did not want in my life. It was a petition. Someone had filed papers that involved my name in a way that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I read the first paragraph twice. There were phrases like concerns for safety and petition for guardianship. Words that sounded like machinery designed to take possession of a life. My name was printed in the heading, and there was a date stamped in the corner, March 14. Lena and Max had signed something. They had formalized fear into a document. I called them both, though a part of me did not expect anything useful to come of it. Max picked up first. His voice moved in the way a child's voice sometimes did when he wanted to be seen but not looked at closely. He said they were worried. He said they had been protecting me. He said things like, "We had to do something." There was shame in his voice, like a person who had borrowed money and found it hard to return it. Lena's answer was different. She did not say protect. She used phrases that sounded practiced. "We only want what's best for you," she told me, in a tone that made my skin feel like a drumhead, taut and ready to snap. "You get flustered with decisions." There it was again, the suggestion that my mind, which had once navigated wills and car registrations and family crises, was suddenly unreliable. It landed not as an argument, but as an unchallengeable fact, put forward by people who had access to forms and to specific language. I had spent my life arguing about how to hang curtains. No one had ever filed a motion about my right to make those arguments. The week that followed moved in two concurrent gears: small acts of proof and the silent erosion of my ordinary routines. I found myself making lists for the first time about evidence, bank statements, canceled checks, the dates of deposits I had made into their lives. I took photographs of the ledger I kept in that leather appointment book. I mailed copies to myself. I slid papers under the door of the neighbor I trusted most, Eleanor, who came by with 2 lemon squares and a look that mixed pity with steel. Eleanor had lived next door for 20 years. She came over and set her bag on my kitchen table like an anchor. "You did what you could for your family," she said, and the words were small but full. She offered to be a witness to things that might otherwise seem like memory, like the time Max came to live with me after losing his apartment, or the summers Lena worked odd 2-week shifts and we covered household bills. Her presence was proof that my life had not been only private feeling, but communal fact. She agreed to a written statement noting dates she'd seen me handle money responsibly, and she shook her head when I said I felt ridiculous for needing to be seen in this way. The manipulative pattern they used was familiar in its choreography. A crisis would arrive, Max's car would die, or Lena's hours at work shrank, and then there would be a short, intense performance of need, panicked voices, promises to pay back, a sudden hunger that could not be quelled without assistance. The next move would be gratitude, effusive and immediate. Thank you notes, small gifts, a domestic warmth that made it easy to forget that the underlying pattern had already arranged itself. Over time, emergency replaced agency. Dependence replaced the honest friction of adult relationships. I had believed that love was giving, not noticing that giving had become a kind of tax. There were moments when I saw them as more than villains. Max would look at me with an expression that contained some shame and some fear. Lena had grown up in a house where doors shut quickly and discussion was dangerous. She adapted to manipulation the way some people sharpen tools. They were not monstrous, and that complicated the grief. I mourned not only what they had done, but who they had become under the weight of the life I had subsidized. Word made its way through the small, porous channels of our town. The hardware store owner I had known since my husband fixed the fence rang with a hand-forged sympathy. The pharmacist who I had asked for help when I couldn't sleep noted in her ledger that I had been consistent and clear about my prescriptions. It was these small, bureaucratic validations, named witnesses and receipts, that would later prove decisive, though in the days they felt only like quiet shoring against an incoming tide. I reached out, finally, to a lawyer I had been recommended, Weber. He met me in a small office filled with books and a faint smell of coffee. He wore glasses that sat low on his nose and spoke with the kind of clarity that felt like a map. He did not promise quick fixes. He said plainly that petitions for guardianship were not unheard of in families with complicated money flows. and that the legal standard turned on capacity and best interest, language that felt like a foreign grammar, but that I noted down and repeated like a charm to keep from being swallowed. He advised gathering records, assembling witnesses, and getting an independent evaluation from a physician who specialized in cognitive assessments. He did not say, "You will win." He said, "We will prepare," and the steadiness in his voice was what I needed. The decision to seek a psychiatric evaluation felt like a betrayal of myself at first. I imagined the clinical room, the formality, the tests that would ask me to draw clocks and repeat lists, as if my life could be condensed to shapes on a page. But Dr. Moore was kind in that exact way that professionals who have worked with elders tend to be: efficient, unromantic, and respectful. He brought with him a folder with a clipboard and a couple of puzzles that made me feel absurdly like a child. I answered questions about my life, my birthdays, my children's schools, dates of purchases. And when he asked about small procedural tasks, I could describe with the calm of habit how I balanced accounts, how I scheduled my medicine, how I remembered appointments. He nodded and recorded things that later would be testimony. Guia de estilo e instruções para síntese de fala. Você é narrador, palestrante, com voz potente, forte e autoritária. O tom deve ser firme e inabalável. Contexto de continuidade. A frase anterior era: Earnings, I spent dividing plants and potting tips. Você está no meio de uma frase ou pensamento. Mantenha o ritmo e a força vocal sem quebrar a conexão. Haja como se estivesse transmitindo uma verdade fundamental. Alfreda remembered how I had testified years ago in small claims court for a refund, how I had understood mundane legal prose and followed it through. Each note read back to me a past self I'd feared vanished, competent, careful, steady. Between appointments and calls, I tried to keep living. I took a walk to the cemetery where my husband was buried and sat by his stone. I brought flowers, simple, from a drugstore, and placed them in a vase that needed washing. I talked to the grave in the way people talk to things that do not argue back. I told him aloud things that had no audience, that I had learned lately how much of myself I'd given away, and that I would try to find the pieces again. Saying it out loud folded the sentence into something actionable. I did not find miraculous answers there, only a steadiness like the way roots hold a tree upright. When the day of the preliminary hearing arrived, the courthouse smelled of old paper and coffee. I sat in the hallway and felt the leather of my purse like a familiar weight against my leg. Weber arrived with a stack of file folders and a calm that seemed to expand around me. "We have witnesses ready," he said, setting down the papers with an economy I liked. He had gathered bank records, the social worker's report, letters from neighbors, and Dr. Moore's evaluation. He had a photograph of my checkbook cover with the pink ribbon mark, and he placed it on the table as if to say, "Here are the small, ordinary things that form who I am." Walking into the courtroom felt like stepping onto a stage I had not auditioned for. There were rows of chairs, the judge's bench like a raised harbor. Opposing counsel sat with papers fanned and faces polite in a way that was sharp. Max and Lena were present, but silent, their faces showing a tightness that might have been shame or refusal to meet the consequences of their choices. I climbed the witness stand when asked and sat with my hands folded. The judge's voice was steady, and he asked for clarity. What was my daily routine? Did I handle my finances? Had I given money willingly, and did I understand the consequences? My answers were plain. I spoke of balancing accounts in the kitchen, of paying utilities, of the small ritual of buying stamps.
I described the transfers I had authorized and the reasons behind them. I spoke of the nights I had put my wallet and the checkbook on the bedside table to sleep with the comfort that everything had been ordered and contributed fairly. Each sentence felt like a stitch repairing a fabric that might have been too easily frayed. Cross-examination was the place where truth and performance collided. Opposing counsel suggested in thinly veiled hypotheticals that I might have been pressured, that gratitude may have been performative, that decisions had been made when I was distracted. He painted pictures of confusion and memory lapses, and he probed where small uncertainties lay.
You answered with the small, detailed facts, dates, deposits, receipts. Dr. Moore's report and the pharmacist's notes were read aloud. The bank records showed not whimsical generosity, but accountable transactions, often noted with memos I had written in my hand: rent assistance, car repair. When the judge's gavel finally struck for the preliminary ruling, it was not a glorious trumpet. He denied the petition to impose guardianship. The words on the paper were concise and final. "The petition is dismissed," he said, and I felt a lightness like the lifting of a weight, but also an ache. Denial of the petition did not mean the relationship was healed. It did not mean the money was returned or that trust would be automatic. It meant only that the law recognized this once, that my autonomy was intact. Walking out of the courthouse, Eleanor was there, leaning against her Toyota, her smile steady as the ground. "You did the right thing," she said, and the sentence was small and true. I felt vindicated in a legal sense, but the more complicated victory was the one that came afterward. The returned quiet of my house that was no longer threaded by the dull hum of secret plans. I installed cameras on both doors, not as a monument to mistrust, but as a practical boundary. I changed phone numbers once, and then again when the calls kept coming. I started a new bank account with a name that felt like the future, mine, separate, defined. There were, as always, tender losses. I mourned the son I had once recognized in the face of the man who had signed papers against me. I grieved the version of family that had included seamless help and gratitude. Grief did not undo the justice, nor did it supersede the need to protect myself. Instead, it sat beside me, a companion with a small box of tissues. In the months that followed, I took particular pleasure in small, quiet acts of agency. I donated a portion of what remained to the garden club to fund new benches, because the flowers had been my solace through the ordeal. I traveled for the first time in years to a town I had always wanted to see, and wore the pink dress I had once folded away, letting sunlight find its hue again on my shoulders. I locked my doors with keys that no longer opened for Max without my explicit permission. If those boundaries caused anger, I accepted it as part of the necessity of keeping myself safe. The wedding I had asked about eventually took place, though not in the way I had hoped. I did not attend. That absence was a sharp, private decision. Presence would have felt like permission. Absence was a declaration. I sent instead a short note and a small contribution made with the clear-headed intention it always should have borne. I chose to be neither punitive nor performative. It was a boundary chosen from a place of self-preservation and dignity. There are nights when the house is quiet, and the wind goes through the garden in the way of an old lullaby. I wrote letters to friends I had not seen in years. I gave to the garden club because I wanted to sit on a bench and know that something I had nurtured would welcome others who sought comfort. When people ask what to do if they find themselves in a similar position, I do not offer instructions. I tell them the shape of my own days. Keep records, call on friendships, speak to professionals who can see the whole rather than only the crisis of the moment. I say the things I mean to say aloud. Protect the small, ordinary practices that show who you are. Keep the keys in a dish and remember why you bought the pink dress in the first place. Some nights before sleep, I take out the leather appointment book and smooth my finger over the pink ribbon impression. The ink is slightly faded now, but the dates and notes remain. They are my proof, not to others, but to myself, that I lived with intention and that I can, still, make choices that preserve the life I have built. There will always be a soft ache for what was lost, for the family that rearranged itself without my consent. Grief sits beside me sometimes, like the shadow of an old friend, and I am learning to welcome it without letting it steer me. The law gave me simplicity, a denial of guardianship. The greater victory has been reassembling a life that holds both generosity and safety. That is the quiet, stubborn work of growing older with dignity. And so the pink dress hangs now where I can see it, a small ceremony each morning as I pass. The camera's red light blinks by the back door, and the small bowl of keys by the entrance holds what they were always meant to, a way in for those invited and a clear boundary for those who are not. I make the tea with the deliberate slowness of someone who has learned not to hurry the small rituals. The kettle whistles, I pour, steam fogs the window for a minute and then clears. The pink dress is a soft, present color in the corner of my eye, a daily punctuation. The camera's red light keeps its steady watch. Outside, a bus rumbles past, and the dog across the street barks at nothing. These ordinary sounds are a kind of reassurance now, the soundtrack of a life that has recalibrated toward predictable edges. The phone rings. I almost don't answer. Habit used to make me pick up before a second tone. Now I let it go to voicemail if it is not someone I know. When I see Max's name, my hand tightens around the mug. His voice on the line is thinner than I expected, the habit of apology wearing at the edges. "Can we talk?" he says. No flourish, no pleading, just a request. I think of the ledger I imagined in those first days of reckoning, the list of favors, the tally of loans, of promises made and postponed. I think, too, of the bowl of keys by the door and the measure of care that must be balanced against self-preservation. We can talk, I say, and make the answer an agreement about place and time rather than a permission granted without conditions. We meet at a diner halfway between town and the highway, a place with booth seats upholstered in cracked red vinyl and coffee that tastes of caramel and burn. Max sits with his coat on, as if prepared to leave at any moment. His hands are calloused in ways that make me think of youth, of jobs taken and abandoned in quick succession. He looks smaller than the memory of him, as if the shape of his ambition has been whittled down by choices. He speaks in fragments, a collage of contrition and explanation. There is no theatrical collapse, no pleading for money. There is, instead, an ache that has learned a form of regret. He asks about Lena in a way that suggests he is trying to map the consequences of his own inattention. He asks about Weber as if Weber were a judge and not the steady friend who nudged me to open an account for myself. I listen. I offer nothing I do not mean. "I will not lend you money," I say quietly when the hint of it appears. And this feels as important as any kind act I could offer. "I will not let you stay with me." But if you are willing to work with a counselor or a program, I can help you find one. I can help you with a resume, with references, with connections to people who will walk you through the first practical steps." He nods in a way that is not entirely hopeful and not entirely hopeless. There is a hesitation that seems honest. "Will you let me come by sometimes?" he asks, the old sense of entitlement slipping back into the question. "No," I say, and the word is a small, firm heartbeat. "Not in the house. We can meet here. We can meet at the library. We'll keep things public for a while. I can offer you time, not shelter. I can offer help, not repayment for the harm that was done." It is less dramatic than I imagined it would be. There is no breakdown, no triumphal reconciliation. There is, rather, a mutual acknowledging of limits. He reaches for the sugar packet and folds it between his fingers like a paper boat. "I understand," he says. Perhaps he does, perhaps not. But the conversation ends with less of the old momentum and more of a clean line drawn between what I will do and what I will not. Back home, Eleanor is weeding the raised bed, her fingers careful among the stems. She looks up when I come in, and there is a softness in her gaze that feels like approval without parade. Weber calls later that evening with a dry joke about my newfound courage. His voice is practical and warm. He asks if I need help with anything. I find myself grateful not only for their assistance, but for how ordinary their presence has become. No performances, no expectations, just people who have chosen to remain. I begin to write again, at first in little stretches. A paragraph in the quiet after breakfast, a note scrawled on the back of an old bill. The work of small sentences is a salve. In the afternoons, I volunteer at the garden club, teaching a class on perennials and the patience they require. It is oddly fitting, a room full of middle-aged women and a few reluctant men, all of them taking comfort in schedules of bloom and rest. I talk about dividing roots, about knowing when to cut away what will not come back. I speak without metaphor, and they listen. Afterward, someone brings a slice of lemon cake, and we stand on the patio and talk about soil composition and grandchildren and books. And for the first time in a long while, I am not the center of a crisis, but a person with a simple competence. Letters begin to arrive, some handwritten, some typed. A card from an old friend in Vermont with pressed leaves tucked inside. A note from the charity where Weber volunteers, thanking me for a donation and inviting me to an event. The mail becomes a series of small confirmations that there is a life beyond the tangled hours of the last year. One afternoon, a parcel comes, addressed to my name, but with no return address. It is heavy and wrapped in plain brown paper, the kind that resists folding neatly. Inside, folded between wrapping tissue, is a small book of poems with a note tucked between the front pages. The handwriting is small and impatient. "Read this when you need a good answer," the note says. No signature. I run my thumb over the scrawl as if it might yield a voice. It does not. I put the book on the kitchen table and leave it there like a promise I have not yet chosen to accept. Days pass in this measured rhythm. Max calls intermittently, and we set times to meet at the library's reading room. He keeps to them. He seems to be doing the slow work of applying for positions and answering the practical questions. He does not ask for access to the house. He keeps his distance in a way that feels respectful and, incongruously, like part of his own penance. Then, one morning, there is an envelope on the doormat, not tucked under the wreath or slid through the slot, but resting heavy and deliberate. My name is written in a hand I do not recognize. The camera must have registered someone leaving it. The red light blinks. I can rewind if I choose. I stand by the door with the envelope in my hand,
and feel a small old anxiety prick the skin behind my eyes. Inside, a single sheet of paper. The sentence is brief, the sort that arrives as if weighted by all the things that have been unsaid. "I need help," it reads. No explanation, no argument, no signature. The paper trembles slightly in my hand. My first instinct is to archive it, a line in a ledger, a note to be stored, and my second is to burn it in the sink, to let the small demand evaporate like steam. Instead, I lay the sheet on the table, smooth it with a finger, and make tea again. Eleanor sits with a book and looks up when I carry the cup over. "Someone left a note," I say. "Do you know who?" she asks, not looking up from the page but folding her hand at the spine in a way that signals she is present. I don't. I hesitate. The camera could tell me who approached the door.
There is usefulness in that. There is also the knowledge that having an answer does not mean I must respond in the way that the answer demands. Weber drops by that afternoon with a jar of pickles he insists I must try. He reads the note and says nothing for a long time. "You don't have to decide right away," he says. "You don't have to make it into something bigger than it is. I need help is not always a map to your front door." His voice is a steady oar in the boat of my thought. "If it's Lena," he says, and leaves the sentence suspended rather than finishing it for me. There is meaning in the pause. That night, I lie awake thinking of contour lines, how boundaries are drawn not as fences, but as edges that specify where one terrain ends and another begins. I think of the ways generosity mutates when it is not framed by care, of the times I blurred the edge because it felt wrong to hold it firm. I have no interest in being cruel. I have no interest in being complicit. In the morning, I call the number on my speed dial that is saved as legal advice, a counselor recommended by a friend during the worst weeks. The person who answers asks gentle questions about the note, about whether there has been direct threat or presumption of access. "No," I say, "only the note." They advise a measured response, document, offer limited resources, insist on public meeting places if any meetings occur. They remind me of the small protections that are also acts of kindness, the difference between enabling and enabling harm. I craft a reply in a spare note of my own. It is short, precise, and leaves room for help that does not place me in danger. Whoever left this, if you are in immediate danger, call your local emergency number. If you are seeking assistance, contact the community center on Maple Street. They have counselors and caseworkers. I am not able to host anyone in my home. I will hear a request for practical aid if it is arranged through a professional or a program. I leave the reply folded and unaddressed on the table for a moment longer. The pink dress hangs visible in the next room, a quiet banner. I fold the paper into an envelope with careful fingers, seal it, and leave it on the porch under the same slate tile where the anonymous note had rested. The security camera will record me. The neighborhood will notice the reply if anyone is watching. And I have, in my small way, set parameters. They are not dramatic. They are not final. They are a line I can live with. Afterward, I walk the garden with Eleanor. We plant spring bulbs in a neat row, pressing them into the earth until they know the pressure of being held. "You did the right thing," she says simply, while tucking a tulip bulb under soil rich with compost. We do not speak the name that might answer the note. We do not need to. The act of placing tulips into the ground is an assurance that life continues in seasons. It is also, perhaps, a small ritual to remind myself that even in the face of requests I did not invite, I remain the steward of my own thresholds. Late that afternoon, the camera's feed spools past a figure lingering near the mailbox, someone with shoulders hunched beneath a coat, someone who places an envelope and walks away with quick, uncertain steps. I watch the movement twice, then turn the feed off. Seeing does not change the fact of the note. It only removes some of the not knowing. The face is obscured. The hand is gloved. It could be anyone. The house settles into evening. I hang the dress with care, smooth the fabric with my palm, and feel a small, steady gratitude for the self that has returned to me. Not unbroken, not triumphant, but intact enough to make choices. Choices are not the same as absolution. They are, instead, the work of learning how to be kind without losing one's foothold. Outside, a neighbor's porch light clicks on. Somewhere down the street, a radio plays an old song that makes the hair on my arms lift. I lay out a fresh pad of paper on the kitchen table, and before I do anything else, I write down the rules that have guided me these past months. Clear, practical, and unadorned. If someone asks me later why I did not open the house to every plea that came my way, I will show them this list. It is a record for myself, an anchor against future bargaining. The envelope on the porch is still there in the morning. This time, when I pick it up, there is a faint smell of cigarette smoke and time. The paper inside is the same as before, but now there is another line written below the initial plea. Please, not money, just a place to talk. I will come with someone. I fold the sheet back into itself and place it in the little dish with the keys, between the house key and the garage key. It feels appropriate that the note be kept with things that admit and things that close. I have offered time and resource through professional channels. I have refused the thing I will not give. Now I have to decide if an encounter in public with conditions is something I can hold without unraveling. I make tea. I stand at the window and watch the lane fill with morning. The pink dress catches the light, a modest signal of a life that is tending itself. I pick up the phone and call the counselor's office to ask, for the first time, whether they can mediate a meeting in a public place with a caseworker present. My voice does not shake. My words are measured. The person on the other end tells me there is a rule. Meetings happen in neutral spaces. They ask whether I want a worker to be present. Yes, I say, and keep me informed in writing. I lay down the receiver and write the meeting conditions on a fresh sheet. Location public, time constrained, no money exchanged, caseworker present, recording allowed if necessary, emergency contact on call.
Esta é a conclusão. Aumente a emoção para o nível máximo, mantendo a potência, e termine com uma pausa solene e impactante. There is a polite stiffness to our movement, as if we are all learning the choreography of distance. When she comes, she is smaller than I expected. Her companion, a woman with close-cropped hair and a coat buttoned tight, walks 2 steps behind, hands clasped in front. The pink dress hangs on her arm like a question. She does not ask for money. She asks quietly for time, and then for permission to speak in fragments about things that have bruised her. The caseworker monitors the pace, offers referrals, and writes down the needs that fit the services she can provide. I listen. I ask the questions I wrote the night before, about safety, about who will be present later, about plans beyond the porch.
Her answers are honest in the way small confessions can be, hesitant, alternating between clarity and fear. We set a next meeting at the shelter and a number for the companion to call if anything changes. When they leave, the pink dress swings like a measured promise. Alone again, I make tea and let the house take back its ordinary sounds. The page in the appointment book is no longer blank. My hand trembles just enough to remind me that boundaries are both armor and work. Outside, the day has taken its first clear breath. Inside, I fold the napkin and place it back where it belongs, steady, waiting.